Moines Register's editorial board with Governor Mike Huckabee of Arkansas, who is running for the Republican nomination for the president. I'm Lynn Hicks, opinion editor, and the editorial board will introduce themselves.
I'm Clark Kaufman. I'm an editorial writer here at the paper.
Hey, Clark.
I'm Brian Smith, I'm the engagement editor.
Brian.
I'm David Shivers, president and publisher.
David.
Emily Nash, executive editor.
Hi.
We'll start off by asking you, why should we consider endorsing you?
Well, I think the main reason is because this country needs seasoned leadership that is prepared to serve, understands the executive branch of government, brings to the job the ability to work with a legislature that is anything but cooperative. What most people I don't think know, Kathy knows because she's heard my stump speech 7,841 times now, but Arkansas is now a reliably Republican state. But when I first got involved in politics, it was the most Democratic state in America, and it was even far more so than Massachusetts or Vermont or Oregon or California, New Jersey, New York, anywhere. And we had fewer Republicans, more Democrats, most lopsided legislature in the entire nation. And I was only the fourth Republican elected in 150 years, the first in 25. When I became lieutenant governor, the atmosphere was so hostile, my door was nailed shut, ordered that way by Webb Hubbell, Hillary's former law partner at the Rose Law Firm, who then had gone to the White House with the Clintons, and the Secretary of State, more than willingly, literally nailed the door shut. It stayed that way for 59 days, after which it was finally opened because of public pressure. And when it was opened, all the office furniture had been removed, the budget zeroed out. So that was my welcome to, glad you're a Republican. Here's how it's going to go down. But I was reelected lieutenant governor and then became governor when the then governor had to resign because of Whitewater-related felonies. Inherited, again, an extraordinarily hostile partisan legislature, but learned how to govern. And I think that's the most significant thing that's lacking in our political system today. People know how to campaign, but they don't know necessarily how to govern. And in that environment, you either learn how to work with people of the other side, or you will absolutely get nothing done. The fact that I got over 90% of my legislative package passed in 10 and a half years and balanced every budget, was able to do a lot of very conservative things, pro-life legislation, 94 tax cuts, significant reform in education and health care, a lot of things that were not just Republican ideas, but really pragmatic, good governing ideas. Time magazine named me one of the top 5 governors in the country. Governing magazine gave me their top governing official of the year award. And I'm not throwing all that out there to pad the resume. I'm just saying that it was not just that I effectively governed in Arkansas, but it was widely understood that what we were doing there in the midst of a hostile legislature was significant to move the ball forward in everything from health care to education to infrastructure development, rebuilding our road system, and also in crisis management, which I think is one of the most important jobs that a president has, as it is for a governor. That background seems to be more of a liability than an asset this year. It's almost like the more experience and qualifications that you have, the more you're punished for it. I don't understand that, can't explain it. I'm just experiencing it. But I was chairman of the National Governors Association, led in implementation of some Medicaid reforms that we worked on, led my own state and welfare reform in the mid-90s, and then later we got a coalition of 49 governors, which was no small feat. Every governor in America except Rod Blagojevich of Illinois signed on to a Medicaid reform proposal, took it to the Congress to get flexibility for Medicaid. So I just wanted to lay sort of a groundwork, but I think the country needs a mature, seasoned leader who knows how to accomplish things, how to be pragmatic in governing. Doesn't change the fact that I'm a very ideological person. I'm never going to hide that fact. And my gosh, if you listen to what I say and what I think, I'm clearly conservative and unapologetic for that. But I also know that politics is the art of the doable, and it has to be done in the context of what you inherit. I think President Obama's one of his many failures was his inability to understand his role as the chief executive, how to set the table, bring people together, and govern from a standpoint of building consensus and coalition. And I find it really unfortunate that he didn't have that executive experience to understand that.
So, talk about a little bit about the liability that you see of the liability of experience, so to speak. What do you think has changed since the last time, 2008, you won here?
Mm-hmm.
What's changed, and why don't you think you're attracting the support and poll numbers that you did?
Well, I mean, it's pretty evident that people who have had zero experience politically, either being elected or having served, have an advantage this time for reasons that I don't fully comprehend or understand. I do think some of it is related to what I call not a dissatisfaction with government, but a seething rage. There is palpable anger among the electorate this year. I think it's true on the Democratic side and as well as the Republicans. How else can you explain, a candidate like Bernie Sanders doing so well on the Democratic stage? And people feel like the government has misled them, cheated them, lied to them, stolen from them, abused them, padded their own pockets at the expense of the taxpayer. I mean, there aren't many descriptions out there that wouldn't be applicable to what people sense. And they feel like it's an us against them. And I mean, that's very, very evident when you go do town halls, as I have done in every one of the 99 counties in this state since May. So I've pretty well sampled the entirety of the Iowa electorate. And, I see it not just in Iowa, it's nationally.
So you're not angry enough?
What's that?
Are you not angry enough?
Well, apparently people must not think so. I mean, I used to be heralded for the fact that one of my signature slogans was, I'm a conservative, but I'm not mad about it. And I'm not. I mean, I'm not angry over it. I understand that I can have strong, absolutely very fixed positions on principles that matter to me. But I also understand that when you sit down at the table and you govern, if you're the only one in the room with that view, you're going to hold to your position, you're not going to compromise or yield on it, but you're also going to recognize you won't get everything you want. As I like to say, the best political scientists of the 20th century were the Rolling Stones, whose song, You Can't Always Get What You Want, kind of sums up political reality. It also sums up business reality and marriage reality, but in politics, that's the way it works. A person who goes in saying, I want everything and I want it now, is going to get nothing, and they're going to get it from now on. They'll never get anything.
So if you become them, then how do you break that divide between us and them?
I mean, I have to hopefully remind voters that I'm not connected to Washington or Wall Street, and that what I was saying about the Washington to Wall Street axis of power, I was saying 8 years ago when I was getting in trouble for it, not being praised for it. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's most remarkable to me, is that a lot of the message that I brought 8 years ago, and for that was pilloried by the likes of the Wall Street Journal and others, is now the message that others have sort of co-opted and transmitted. And I think people have, somewhat forgotten that these were things I was saying 8 years ago and before, but they have a much louder megaphone right now. And I do think that there is a sense in which this election cycle is being driven by the media, which determines who gets the most airtime. Therefore, more airtime means better poll numbers. Better poll numbers means better placement on the debate stage. That in turn leads to better poll numbers and better placement. And it's a pretty vicious cycle. So the whole thing has been kind of captured by the process as opposed to the principles or the persons who are actually running for office. And it's not just me. I mean, look at some of the other people. You've got governors like Scott Walker, Bobby Jindal, and Rick Perry, accomplished governors, who served, in the case of certainly Bobby and Rick, for multiple terms. I mean, look at their backgrounds, strong, solid. And other governors, Jeb, John Kasich, even Christie, all struggling to get some traction, all sort of at the back of the stage. Pataki, gone. Now Pataki might be a little more middle of the road to left of center for a lot of the Republican base, but you can't deny that the guy was an effective governor, served 3 terms. in New York, led through 9/11. That was no easy process to go through.
You suggested that as president, you'd abolish the IRS.
Mm-hmm.
What would that accomplish? I mean, we still need an agency, obviously, to collect revenue and taxes and that sort of thing.
Well, not if you have a tax on consumption, which the fair tax really changes the whole dynamic, because if you adopt any other tax plan, yeah, you still have to have the IRS. You have some candidates saying they're going to abolish it, but they're not, because as long as you're taxing income, even if it's a flat tax, you still have to report income because you have to decide what that flat tax is against. The difference of the fair tax and the history of it is that it's frankly the most researched tax plan that exists. It's not hurriedly put together by a campaign committee. I wish I could take credit for it. I can't. It was designed by some of the top economists in the country from University of Chicago, MIT, Boston University, Harvard, and Stanford. Commissioned in 1995 by a group of Houston businessmen who wanted to come up with a proposal that would be a pro-growth approach to taxes in the country. They didn't want to raise or lower. That wasn't the purpose. The purpose was, what would be the way to collect the taxes that we have to function as a government? Not getting into the, again, should they be higher, should they be lower, but just to replace, is there a way to make it so that there would be a growth focus, so that the economy would grow? And all of the men who spent the money fully expected that they would be presented with a flat tax proposal, but a flat tax on income. And after a few years, and I think the group spent over $20 million in thorough research. I mean, they polled, they analyzed, they looked at economies all over the world, and their proposal was, yeah, a flat tax, but a flat tax on consumption. You assess the tax at the point of a retail sale. It's not a VAT, which I'm strongly opposed to a VAT. And the reason being, the VAT is still an invisible tax to the consumer. So the consumer never knows what he or she is paying. And I think a tax system needs to be transparent. So with a fair tax, you know exactly what you pay, everybody pays it, and the best point is it's really significantly pro-growth. Economists like Stephen Morse says it's rocket fuel for the economy. There are several things that it accomplishes beyond getting rid of the IRS, bringing probably $31 trillion of capital back to the country that's offshore. That would be a huge boost to the U.S. economy, to be sure. Manufacturing would once again be competitive in this country, which it isn't now, because we tax capital and labor. And by taxing capital and labor, the chairs that we're sitting in today, 22% of the cost of them, embedded tax. You don't see it. You go to the showroom floor, you look at the price. They don't say, here's how much the chair is, and here's what we tax capital and labor to make the chair in America. Therefore, there's another 22%. It's just you pay it. Take the same exact chair, make it in China, let them steal the design, which they probably will do, send it over here, and it's even before labor and environmental and regulatory costs, it's 22% cheaper because it doesn't have those taxes built in. China doesn't tax capital and labor in construction of things for export. It isn't taxed at export. We don't put a tariff on it when it comes in. And no wonder they're beating our brains out in manufacturing.
But this isn't go to a fair tax, it's not bureaucracy free. I mean, in fact, you talked about, you know, people would have to be eligible for prebates and things like that because it's a regressive tax.
It's not regressive. It's
Well,
actually
they're-
progressive. Yeah.
Poorer people are going to pay more. if it's
No, they
based
will
on
actually pay
consumption.
less. The bottom third of the economy benefits 15 to 16% with a fair tax. The middle third, 7 or 8, top third, 4 or 5. And here's how. Under the fair tax, there's a provision called a prebate, which means that every person is essentially untaxed from basic necessities. That gives poor people a much better tax advantage than people rich because of the proportion. It's exactly the opposite of a strict tax that would be regressive if it were sales without the prebate. And when you say, how do we collect it? It doesn't have to be the IRS, the Treasury Department, but the collection comes at the state level, not the federal level. The benefit both to the merchant and to the state is that the merchant and the state get a basis point for the collection. So there's financial windfalls for merchants as well as for state governments. And that's why, I don't think you'll find people complaining about it, either the merchants or the states. Plus, keep in mind, they're already set up to assess taxes. I mean, everything is done electronically. All they have to do is calculate that into the cash register, and it's an automatic. So it's not complicated. It may have been 100 years ago if they'd have proposed it, when everybody was still using a scratch pad. But in today's technology, the implementation of the fair tax is really not that complicated.
You've also suggested that the Department of Education be done away with. That you don't think the federal government should play a role in shaping policy and that kind of thing?
No, I really don't. The Department of Education came into being in 1979. If test scores and if education results had gotten significantly better, I think we could have pointed and said, boy, that was a great idea. But actually, they've gotten worse. And the best education decisions still need to be made closer to the people. So it's local school boards, mothers and fathers, governors, legislators, who are closer to those decisions. States are competitive. They will, in fact, gravitate toward good ideas. And the Department of Education has historically been a stumbling block for good policy because mandates that require certain compliance, whether it's reauthorization of ESEA, the worst of all was the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. That was supposed to be fully funded by the federal government 35 years ago. Never has happened. Never happened. There's funding. I want to say, when I left office 8 years ago, they were only funding maybe 15% of that, and states were eating the rest of it. Ask any governor in America what one of his biggest nightmares is. It's dealing with compliance at the federal level and not having the flexibility to tailor the programs based on the students and the demographics of that unique state. Obviously, Iowa is very different than Rhode Island, not only geographically but demographically. Massachusetts, very different from Mississippi. What works in one state may not work in another because of the unique aspects of, are these rural schools, are they urban? What is the education level of the community? There are a lot of factors that go into it.
Speaking of Iowa, obviously this is a big agricultural state.
Mm-hmm.
You said on your website that Washington is at war with American farmers and the rural way of life. What do you mean by that, and what would you do about it?
Yeah, well, part of the problem is the EPA, for example, wants to regulate all water usage. Well, on a farm, a farmer is far better able to understand the difference between a mud puddle in the back of their pasture and a true wetland. I understand wetlands. I mean, I'm from Arkansas, for heaven's sakes. The entire eastern side of Arkansas is one great big rice field. It's great for duck hunting and rice growing. And, you know, we understand the nature of a wetland and what it's for, how it is a great filter. It's sort of God's natural filter for water in the soil. It works wonderfully. But when you have somebody sitting in a concrete office in Washington who's probably never spent the night on a farm, and that person's trying to dictate to farmers in whose hands that land has been for 150 or 200 years, it's a disconnect. And that's what you have. I mean, I talk to farmers all over Iowa, but it's the same story I hear in Arkansas because we're a very agricultural state there as well. And when you have policies that don't reflect even good science, much less good sense, it's a real detriment. It adds cost, does not add value. For example, if you're farming corn and part of your cost of farming is complying with federal regulations that really don't help you get a better yield on the bushel of corn. I think corn last year in 15, that would be last year, about $3.50 a bushel. That's what people were getting in 2007. I mean, it's the same price. Now, good thing is our agricultural methods are incredibly efficient and amazingly safe compared to anywhere else in the world. So if they're that efficient and that safe, why is it that somebody in Washington needs to tell people here how to better farm their corn? I mean, I would trust that Governor Branstad and your Department of Agriculture in your state, or my current governor and the Department of Agriculture in Arkansas, would be far better to regulate anything that needs to be regulated, whether it's pesticides or the use of water, because we have a vested interest in making sure that those industries are self-sustaining and that they're going to be around. But nobody cares more about the farm being sustainable than the farmer. And that's what I find just remarkable. It's almost like that the people in Washington think that they're protecting America from the farmers. Well, the farmers don't need protecting, or the people don't need protection from the farmers. The farmers need protection from the government right now.
Another issue that's facing agriculture is immigration. Help me understand. In the past, you've talked about helping people find this path to citizenship. Now you've talked more about no amnesty. Help me understand where you stand on this issue.
Well, I don't think that's incompatible. Amnesty is rewarding people for breaking the law. I don't think that is a good policy. It wasn't a good policy in 1986 when Reagan did it. It turned out to have disastrous consequences. I think it's still disastrous now. It does not mean that you try to round up 11 or 15 or 20 million, however many people are here, who knows, and say we're going to start deporting people en masse. But there's got to be a process. But it first has to start with securing the border and having control of the border. I think that's where most Americans are so fed up and disgusted. They feel like nobody is minding the store. And I always like to say this, it's like if in your kitchen a pipe burst and water's flowing all over the kitchen. Your first inclination is not to say, honey, let's go get in the car. We'll go down to Home Depot. We'll get us a new faucet. First inclination, stop the leak. Because if you don't stop the leak, the new faucet isn't going to help you. And I think that's what a lot of people understand. Again, it's common sense. Stop the leak before you start figuring out what are we going to do with all the water on the floor. Well, we're going to stop the leak. Then we'll talk about what we're going to do. And I really think that that's the order in which immigration policy has to be formed.
So if you stop the leak, then what? What do you do with, how do you sort through the 11 million?
You do two things. Number one, you create a much more efficient, streamlined way for people to come here legally. When I talk to people who have immigrated, and it took them sometimes as much as 18 years and thousands of dollars of legal fees to become legal here, not just for citizenship, but even just for green card, permanent residency. That is incredibly inefficient. And that may work if you're going to be a high-tech scientist and be paid $300,000 a year. But if you're going to pick tomatoes in South Arkansas and you're going to make $7.50, $8 an hour, you don't have several $1,000s to spend on lawyers and getting it done. So it has to be realistic and reasonable, and it's not. We had a girl that worked for us in the campaign before from Austin, Texas. She's an attorney. Her parents were very well educated, came here from China, and it took them 18 years to go through the process. She was a great example of somebody, when people would talk about, well, let's just have amnesty, a kind of a wide open forgiveness program, she bristled up and said, are you kidding? After what my family went through, you're going to just say, oh, you guys were chumps. You spent 18 years and thousands of dollars. These folks can just come on in and no questions asked. I mean, there's more than just people, Americans who feel like they've lost their jobs or maybe they're competing. And part of the problem, and one thing, let me go back to the fair tax that it addresses. If I hire you and you're an American worker at $12 an hour, I'm going to take taxes and Medicare and Social Security, all the payroll taxes are going to come out of your check. If I hire you and pay you $8 an hour, I'm exploiting your labor by $4 an hour. So I'm cheating you, but you're not going to go tell anybody because you can't. Who are you going to tell? Nobody. So I've cheated you $4 an hour that I put in my pocket as the employer, but I've done something else. I'm keeping the 7.5% employer portion of the payroll tax, so I'm getting a double benefit for hiring illegals. I think we forget that there is a real reason that illegal immigration is not something that is being addressed by Democrats or Republicans, because let's face it, a lot of people are making a lot of money off of illegal labor. Now, the truth is, at $8 an hour, he has more take-home money than you do at 12, because nothing's coming out of his check. I mean, we've created a system that lends itself toward illegal immigration, both for the worker as well as the employer. Who gets socked in the gut? The American worker, who has to pay the taxes and have the payroll deductions taken out, who doesn't get his whole paycheck. Under the fair tax, everybody gets the full paycheck. You pay taxes at consumption, which means if you're illegal, you go buy something at Walmart or JCPenney, you pay the tax like everybody else. There is no escape from it.
So say you're able to secure the borders, you get the system so that people can come over here legally quicker. There's still the question of the people that are here undocumented and what to do about them.
Yeah. And I honestly think that, again, that's got to be the deal hammered with a bipartisan approach. And rather than tell you what that's going to look like, because I don't know how passionate people on both sides are, but it's probably going to come somewhere in the middle, and you better have somebody as president who knows how to bring people together from greatly disparate views, who can get them at the table, talk through it. But I think a prerequisite to that is still going to be having a border that's secure. And somebody thinks that there is an honest assessment of addressing both the open door policy that we have now and the fact that there are people being exploited for their labor, and that there are a lot of American employers who are benefiting from illegal immigration. We're going to have to address that.
A lot of politicians have talked about bridging the divide. Obviously, you heard President Obama in the State of the Union talk about his regrets not being able to do it. So what is it about you that would make that successful?
Well, first of all, I know that you don't bridge the divide by going out and demonizing the other party in every speech you ever make, including this very State of the Union in which he talks about bridge the divide. And then he blames the Republicans for everything that's gone wrong. You can't govern like that. I mean, you just can't. It's the most irrational approach to governing I've ever seen. And I thought Barack Obama had an incredible opportunity. He really did. When he was elected 8 years ago, he had an extraordinary opportunity to bring people together, which was his campaign theme 8 years ago, rising above partisanship. And when he got in office, turns out he's about the most partisan president of my lifetime. I mean, look back at Democratic governors. Bill Clinton knew how to govern. He had experience as a governor. He had a very democratic legislature, but he still had to work with people and bring them to the table. So he passes NAFTA, welfare reform, tax cuts, the economy grew. Give him credit. He understood the nature of the beast. And I'll tell you this, from a governor's perspective, you call the Clinton White House, you got an answer from Bill Clinton himself, usually within half an hour. He understood what we were trying to get done at the state level. He'd set up an appointment, so I'd go see Donna Shalala 2 days later if I had a problem with HHS. Barack Obama sees himself as sort of above all that. He doesn't get into the weeds. So, this isn't a partisan thing as much as it is an experience thing, an understanding of what the nature of the executive branch is, not only what your role is, but quite frankly, and I say it often, a man's got to have a little Clint Eastwood in him. A man just got to know his limitations. This is a president that never knew his role, but he also never knew his limitations. He didn't understand that if Congress didn't act on something, he couldn't just go out there and do it by executive order. That's unconstitutional. But he did it anyway, and then a cowardly Republican Congress basically let him go with it and never provided their constitutional role of checks and balances, which they should have been doing. The result is the whole government is, I think, pretty well screwed up.
Well, you talk about not demonizing the other side, but you've distributed things like shooting range targets with Obamacare on them.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't really seem like the most conciliatory approach to governing that you're talking about.
Oh, so it was something we did in the campaign to point out the strength of the Second Amendment, support for it, in light of policies that we believed were a fail. Now, in a campaign, you're going to take a very strong partisan position. When you're elected, it's not that you change your views, you don't change your principles. You take them right to the table with you. But you also know if you're sitting down with a dozen people, you're probably not going to get every single thing you want in the same flavor at which you want it. What Obama never understood was that he wasn't going to get everything he wanted. I remember the meeting that he had, it was televised, with Republicans on Obamacare. And he came in and sat down, and Lamar Alexander said, "Mr. President, I'd like to present some thoughts." And he just pushed him back and said, elections have consequences. I don't think you guys realize that. John McCain brought up something, and he said, "John, I hate to bring this up, but you lost." I mean, it was just a stick it up your nose. Well, I'm sorry, but that's not how it works. It just didn't. I went after a Speaker of the House in Arkansas that had been a pain in the rear end to me, and he was going to be the incoming Speaker. And I thought, this guy gets to be Speaker. It's going to be a rough go. So he had an opponent. I vigorously campaigned for the incoming Speaker's opponent. I mean, I spent money, I spent time, and I was on the ballot as well. The speaker incoming campaigned against me, I campaigned against him. You know, it wasn't nasty, it wasn't ugly, but it was vigorous. And when it was all over, I won and he won. So I called him, I said, let's visit. He came into my office, we sat down, I said, look, here's the deal. I did everything I could, I mean everything I knew to do to keep you from being speaker, and I lost. You're still here. But you did everything you could to keep me from sitting here and being governor, and you lost. I said, I don't get this for reasons I don't understand. The same people who elected me elected you. I don't frankly appreciate it. I wish they'd have just sent me and not you, but here we are. And I said, now for the next 2 years, while you're speaker and I'm governor, we can have it one of two ways. We can continue the campaign and we can fight each other every day. Or you and I can realize that we're really not opponents anymore. The campaign's over. Frankly, if you're the best speaker that the state has ever seen, it does not hurt me one iota. I'm fine with that. And if I'm the best governor that's ever been, it doesn't really diminish you. But we're both diminished if we let our personal anxieties from this campaign spill over into this Capitol. And I said, here's the deal I'll make with you. You and I will talk regularly, every day during the session and every week when we're not in session. We will communicate. And if I hear that you've said something about me or about the administration, I won't react in the newspaper. I'll call you and I'll ask you to do the same. And we will have a one-on-one conversation. I'll come to your office, you'll come to mine. And we shook hands on that and did it, and we had an absolutely terrific relationship. He sometimes voted against stuff I wanted. I didn't always favor stuff he wanted, but we never had a cross word in his 2 years as a speaker and had a terrific experience working together because we understood. You know, that's how I look at it.
So,
People have sent us both there.
so what would you say? I'm not sure the American people, by and large, understand sort of we've heard this a few times in these interviews of people saying there's a difference between campaigning and there's a difference between governing,
Yeah.
sort of what you say on the stump versus what you actually do. How would you help the American people? Because part of me wonders if that's part of this seething rage that people have. They hear something from people on the campaign trail, and then the reality sort of sets in and there's compromise that has to happen. How would you talk to voters about the dynamics between campaigning versus governing?
A good executive can explain that and can model that behavior. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it and what you say and with whom you say it. You know, if people see you effectively getting things done and the government is functioning, they appreciate that. I think what people are frustrated with most is that the government is dysfunctional. It's not that it's too liberal or too conservative. It's too dysfunctional. It just doesn't work at all. And who it really doesn't work for are working class people. If you're totally getting your income off Wall Street assets, you're doing great. Well, maybe not the last couple of weeks, but normally you're doing pretty darn well. And even now, with all the value lost with major stocks like even Apple stock and Walmart stock taking a hit, and a lot of the S&P 500, Dow down 500. I guarantee you nobody's lifestyle is taking a big hit who are at the top 1-2% of the economy. They're not saying, honey, we're not going to be able to go to Europe this summer. We're going to have to maybe go to the Catskills. Nobody's affected. But I'll tell you who's affected down there at the bottom. Talk to a single mom who's trying to figure out how to get enough money to drive by, pay the daycare bill, and get to work and provide the extra cost of clothes for work and food at work, and it's hitting her hard. It's hitting unemployed welder. It's hitting a truck driver. It's hitting, families in your state and every other state in this country. And that's why I said at the debate last week that, when the president at the State of the Union talked about how great the economy was, it's just doing great. And I'm thinking, he should have stood in the layaway line at Walmart just before Christmas, talked to those folks and said, hey, is your economy just booming? You guys having the best Christmas you've ever had? He'd have heard a very different story about his economy than he was able to talk about in the land of the swells up there in Washington.
But you don't support raising the minimum wage, is that correct?
Well, I support what I call the maximum wage. I think when the government artificially raises the floor, all you get is a lot more people on the floor. For example, here's the question. What do you raise it to? Bernie Sanders and Hillary say 15 an hour. Talk to an employer in the fast food business or retail and say, if you pay all your people 15 an hour, what happens? They'll say either we close or we let a lot of people off. Or what happens is when my wife and I were in Spain a couple of years ago, went to a McDonald's, and tell you what we saw there. You go into McDonald's and there's nobody but the counter but one person. You go to an electronic kiosk, you put in your food order, you swipe your credit card, you do your own waiting. You wait on yourself and put in your order. One person comes and hands you your sack, and there's maybe one or two people in the back. They just automate everything. So in the name of improving life for people, you're especially going to just totally devastate entry-level jobs for a lot of Americans. Smart companies are going to pay their people more when they can. I'll give you two great examples of companies that I admire them, and I think that they're doing the right thing by their employees. One is Delta Airlines. They're going to post a first quarter profit that's going to be fairly significant. But last year in October, they gave system-wide their entire workforce a 14% raise. Now that's huge. At a time when the CPI was, what, less than 2%? They're giving everybody from baggage handlers to the executive staff a 14% increase. They could have given all that to the stockholders in dividends, but they didn't. The reason is because they knew that the reason they had been successful and one of the few airlines in the black was because they had a better on-time delivery, they had fewer lost bags, they had fewer canceled flights, customers were happier, they made more money, and bottom line, they had money. They gave it, a lot of it to their employees, some of it to their stockholders, but the stockholders and their board were smart enough to say, keep those people happy, keep them making the customers happy, we'll be a profitable airline when everybody else is sucking air. Publix food stores, which is big in the Southeast, is sort of like the Hy-Vee of the South. They're employee-owned. Go into their stores and people want to see what they can do to help you. I mean, those employees are all over it. Why? Because they have a financial stake in the company. And if that company does well, they're going to get a bigger paycheck. I think that's a real process to make it work.
You didn't mention Walmart in your own state, who didn't they lift all their minimum wage?
Yeah, they did.
And it's costing them.
They're closing 269 stores. They're laying off 16,000 employees. And one of the things that happened when they raised the minimum wage for the entry level, the people who are just above that say, where's my wage increase? And if they say, well, you don't get one, okay, wait a minute. Before, this guy was making, by the way, Walmart, you know how many people in the Walmart system out of 4 million employees were paid minimum wage? Anybody know? Want to take a guess?
I'm guessing it's a pretty small percentage.
It's a very small number. Out of over 4 million employees, the number was approximately about 4,000 people. That's how many actually were minimum wage at Walmart. Walmart paid better than Target. They paid better than Penny's or Sears. Never got credit for it because people like to bust Walmart and assume that they were, cheating their employees. But what Walmart did when they started raising the cost of the entry-level workers, the ones at just the next step now were a lot closer, and so they assumed they should get an increase as well. And so rather than having a bunch of happy employees at the bottom, you have a bunch of mid-level employees who are incredibly unhappy because they feel like that now that wage gap should have worked for them as well. I mean, it's the law of unintended consequences is what it comes down to, and that's it's one of those things that sound good in theory, but you put it into practice and it doesn't work very well, which I'd go back to. This is the practical side of leadership. You can have great ideas, but until you road test them, you just don't know how they're going to come out.
One of the other things that's obviously affecting families is the cost of college and college debt. And we've heard a lot about debt-free college or free college.
Yeah.
What do you support to try to help families that are dealing with college debt?
Well, first thing I do is tell college students, for heaven's sakes, don't go and buy a college you can't afford. For the same reason that you're probably not going to go buy a Lamborghini or a Ferrari as a freshman in college. Why? Because you can't afford it. That's why. I mean, you're not going to drive a car that you can't afford. Don't go to a college you can't afford. And if you can't afford $60,000 a year tuition, don't go there. And by the way, when people quit going to ridiculously expensive colleges that can't justify that kind of cost, colleges will lower their rates when their dorms are empty and their classrooms are completely bone dry, and kids start going online and they go to community colleges to get their first 2 years, or they go to regional and more local schools that give them a reasonable price for a decent education. There aren't many college degrees that are worth the kind of money colleges are charging, and they do it because they get away with it. And frankly, the more money the federal government puts into so-called help programs, the more the college raises the rate even above whatever help they get. It's the biggest scam in higher education today. Obviously, I saw it as a governor in the state level. If you say we're going to have a scholarship program, students will get X dollars. Well, the colleges will just raise their tuition. They'll tell a student, I'm going to give you a $5,000 scholarship. Oh, you're all excited. I didn't tell you I raised tuition $7,500, so you have a net loss of $2,500. But they've given you a $5,000 scholarship, and everybody thinks they've done you a big favor. There's got to be a realistic approach. I don't believe in free college. I think it's a huge mistake because what people get for free they don't appreciate. And besides, if you give a student free college at 20, who's going to pay for that? He'll pay for it when he's 30, 40, and still paying for it when he's 50 in the increase of debt. What I would favor is trade off for national service. You want to go to the military? Okay. Serve your country? Go to college. You want to do Peace Corps, teach for America? Similar arrangement, but not for free. You know, you got to put something in to get something out. John Kennedy was right. Don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. And we don't have many people asking what they can do for the country. We had a lot of people saying, what are you going to do for me? And we need to say to them, we're broke. We have $20 trillion, or we soon will have, in debt. And we can promise you the moon, but you're going to end up paying for it anyway. So let's just be honest with you and tell you, it's not going to be free. The one thing, let me mention this, is let students refinance college loans at a market rate, because the rate at which most of these students are getting student loans is way higher than the market conditions.
We talked very briefly just a minute ago about gun control and your feelings about the Second Amendment. Is there any sort of limitation or restriction on gun control that you would support? I mean, should people be allowed to stockpile as many weapons as they feel they need?
I mean, I don't know why the government should tell me what that limit is, because how does the government know? I mean, who gets to make that decision? Who died and made somebody God to say, well, you know what, 3 guns, you're set. Well, what if I'm a collector? What if I am a hobbyist and I have a whole room full, a gun safe filled with firearms, because I enjoy going out and target shooting, or I hunt for different things and use different guns, which I do. You know, I don't use a deer rifle to go duck hunting, and I don't use a pistol to go turkey hunting.
So do you think the laws now are adequate, or do you think there are changes out there that need to be?
You know, Lynn, nobody has yet said to me, here's a law, what do you think of it, that I would say this would have stopped Sandy Hook, San Bernardino, Aurora. No law, because the laws really are all about guns, but the real challenge is not about controlling the weapons, is how do you control the people who are either mentally ill or the people who are determined to commit a crime. So I'd much rather see us focus on how do we deal with the people behind the guns, because those are the same people behind a pipe bomb. They're the same kind of people that will be behind a knife. And when people use terms like assault weapon, I think that's so phony, because the pen in my pocket is an assault weapon if I stick it in your neck. And most people, I've had this discussion with my own staff at Fox News in New York. They were all New Yorkers, and when discussions came up about assault weapons, I asked them, I said, what do you mean by that? And they would point to an AR-15. I said, what do you know about an AR-15? Well, it's a real lethal weapon. I said, honestly, yeah, it's a dangerous gun, and it's got a pretty significant firepower. But the rifle I use to deer hunt is significantly more lethal than an AR-15. Because the Weatherby 300 mag, that's a heck of a rifle. And the point is, people look at that gun and they think it's really a serious gun because it looks scary, it looks military. But everything on that AR-15 is functional, whether it's the adjustable
I'm
stock.
guessing you don't have a big magazine on your deer.
What's that?
The rifle you use to hunt deer, you don't have a big magazine on like you
3
would with
shots.
rifles.
Yeah.
So I mean that is one.
But if I
difference
go
is the
if I go
size of the-
target shooting, using the AR-15 is a whole lot easier to use because you don't have to reload that magazine every 3 shots.
Would
That's
you
how-
agree that there are guns that are simply designed to kill people as opposed
Every
to
gun is
deer?
designed potentially to kill a person.
But there are
Yeah.
guns that are designed to kill people and kill large numbers of people in a very short amount of time.
See, I would disagree that that's what they were designed for. That's what they could be used for. But that's like saying a propane tank would kill a whole lot of people if you blew it up in a crowded area. But that's not what it was designed for. It would certainly do that if an idiot or a criminal used it. And that's where I go back to. It's not the gun in the hands of a law-abiding citizen that we need to worry about. It's any weapon, whatever it is, in the hands of someone who's either deranged or who has criminal intent or who's a terrorist.
So how would you, when you say you don't deal with guns, deal with people? How would you deal with the people?
Well, our mental health system, I think, took a turn for the worse in the 70s when we decided to mainstream everybody in the mental health world. And I understand it was a noble and, at the time, very humanitarian approach to say, let's not put people in institutions, let's keep them in their communities, make sure they come into community health centers, get medication, they'll be integrated. Some people can't be integrated very well. And if they don't take their meds, you're not going to integrate them just because you want them to be. And I think we've let the pendulum swing too far so that we are so averse for institutional care that we assume that everybody who is mentally ill will be okay and will self-medicate. It just won't happen. So I think we've got to re-examine that. Again, I can't tell you that here's the specific prescription for that. I think that's a very thoughtful process to come to.
Does the federal government have a role in that, do you think?
Oh, I think to help analyze what the solution should be. But I always believe the best way to find out whether it works is to test it in a number of states to see how does it work. Because I really believe if we go back to the original idea that the states were the laboratory of democracy, where we find out what ideas work. And if it works, we all adopt it. If it doesn't work, we don't make a 50-state mistake. Obamacare is a great example of coming up with a one-size-fits-all 50-state solution, and now all the bad parts are spread on all 50 states, rather than say, let's take 8 or 10 states that want to be a part of this experiment in health insurance. Let's put it in practice and see what works, what doesn't, what can be improved, what needs to be completely jettisoned, and then build it from there. That would be a better approach.
Are there elements of the Affordable Care Act that you think do work that, you've talked about repealing the whole
Yeah.
act, but I assume there are elements of it that you'd like to see incorporated in whatever replaces it.
Well, I think the challenge of Obamacare was that it fundamentally was built on the wrong premise, and that was that if you insure people, that really resolves the health care issue. But the fallacies were that it was going to be cheaper, that you would be able to maintain the same connection with your doctor and insurance company, all of which proved to be totally false. I think anybody who had ever looked at an insurance program, that's why I certainly, as a governor, having run the Medicaid program in my state, our state employees represented the largest single pool of people in the private insurance market. I think most every governor probably had in his or her state employee circle the largest number of employees. For example, we employed more people in state government than Walmart and Tyson's combined. And this is true. I'm sure if you talk to Terry Branstad, the state of Iowa is the largest employer in the state. So you have an experience of what it means to run an insurance program. And what you learn is that when you start adding mandated coverages, and if you take away limitations and say, look, there's no lifetime limits, no pre-existing conditions, sounds wonderful. But if you did car insurance or homeowners insurance like that, think about that. I mean, the reality of it is, say I'd like to buy a insurance for my car. Tell me about your car. Well, I totaled it yesterday, but I'd like to get a new car and I'd like to buy insurance so we can retroactively insure it. if you've wrecked your health and you want to retroactively insure from day one with no lifetime limits, there's not an insurance carrier in the country that can afford to do that unless you have a whole lot of very young, healthy people coming in to pay for it. And that didn't happen with Obamacare, and anybody should have been able to tell you that it wasn't going to happen. And so the result is I talk to people every day in this state and everywhere else who say, my insurance went up 200%. I talked to a guy in Iowa last week. He's a teacher. This was in Southeast. I think it was in, was it Muscatine or, no, Davenport. It was in Davenport. Guy makes $59,000 a year. His insurance this year is $28,000. I mean, that's $28,000 on a $59,000 a year salary. I mean, that's staggering. Nobody can afford that. So basically, he'll choose to eat or have health insurances.
You make the comparison with car insurance. Of course, with health insurance, it's linked to people's employment.
Yeah.
And people change jobs a lot more
Right.
often than they do now. Is that part of the problem?
Yes.
Is that health insurance is linked to jobs?
Totally. People should have possession of their health insurance just like they do their homeowners and auto. It ought to be transportable, just like their insurance with a house or a car would be. And they ought to be able to purchase what they want, what they need, what they can afford, rather than have to purchase a cafeteria of benefits that they don't need. I talk about that, I'm insured for alcohol and drug rehab, because with Obamacare, everybody has to have that. I've never tasted beer, so I'm pretty sure I'm not a candidate for alcohol rehab. It's not that I'm some prude. I just don't like the smell of it, and I smelled it when I was a teenager. Never had an appetite for it. Couldn't care less. It's just not something, that I'm interested in. So I'm paying insurance for something that I'm pretty sure I don't need. And I think people ought to have a choice to say, I don't want that. I'm not going to pay for that. Let me pay for something different that I might have a need for. But I really think the big picture, and this is what I've talked about in at least two of the debates, is that we need to focus on cures and prevention. And what I would do as president, and I did appreciate the other night, the State of the Union, the president talked about a moonshot for cancer, and I agree with that. But I think it should include cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. These are the four cost drivers. These are the four things that cost the healthcare system the most dollars, and the trajectory of these four diseases will bankrupt the country. 85% of all cost of Medicare is chronic disease. 85%. That's staggering, and it's continuing to go up. 8 years ago, it was 75 to 80%. We've already seen it move up that much. And most of the most expensive care is end-of-life care because we are so sick by the time we come to the finish line. We need to do for those four diseases what we did for polio in the 1950s when I was a kid, and we eradicated. Imagine what would happen if we had cures for cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's alone will be a $1.1 trillion disease by the year 2050. And the New York Times did a piece about 2 months ago, and it was on Alzheimer's, and they said that the family portion of caring for an Alzheimer's patient, which usually is going to be 8 to 10 years from diagnosis to death, is somewhere in the neighborhood of $280,000. This is the non-insured cost. Nobody can handle that. I mean, my mother-in-law died of Alzheimer's a year and a half ago. It is the most horrible way for a person to die. They're dead long before their body gives up. And most of us here have seen it up close and personal, and we know that this is a devastating disease, and what it does to families, even if you could fix the financial end of it, the quality of life that is impacted by all the people in that circle is just so dramatic. So, I mean, an accelerated approach to say within a decade we're going to find a cure to these four things would be a game changer for the economy, a game changer for healthcare in the country. And that's what I think we need to be focused on, rather than just how we're going to spend more money on people with catastrophic diseases once they're diagnosed and once they're out of control. Never can catch up. Right. Now, that requires a bold approach, but I believe that's a bipartisan issue. I think that you would have Republicans and Democrats on board willing to spend the kind of money for the research that would help us get to those conclusions much quicker than we are now.
I just had a headline come across my phone saying Branstad wants Cruz defeated in Iowa.
Did he say that? Branstad did?
That's according to this headline, yeah.
Out of your paper?
Yeah.
Or is it one of those unreliable rags? Not the Register, which we can always trust, so just make sure.
No, this was our.
Said that at the Renewable Fuels Conference.
Oh, okay.
It's about the RFS.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
right.
But generally, you've competed for the same voters, same pool of voters, evangelicals, et cetera. Why is it that he's gained so much traction here, do you think?
It's hard to know. I mean, I think, again, it's really difficult for me to assess that. I do think that people feel that my main target was the evangelicals. Quite frankly, 8 years ago, if the evangelicals had truly coalesced and monolithically supported me, I would have won even with a greater margin, and I would have gone on to win the nomination. The fact that the evangelicals didn't, a lot of my support came from working class people who were dissatisfied with the economic conditions. I mean, that really was the untold story. If you go back and look 8 years ago, many of the so-called evangelical leaders, people who ran major organizations, did not support me. They supported Romney, some of them McCain, but a lot of them Romney. And their justification was, we want a seat at the table, we think he's going to win, we want to go with a winner. I mean, I had a lot of rank and file, but I did not have the organizations. They actually went elsewhere.
Do you think that you can build up enough momentum in the next 13 days to be able to get one of the top positions in the caucus?
Emily, I sure hope so, because doing 150 events in Iowa in 1 month in this cold weather for an Arkansas boy, dang, I hope so, because otherwise I'm going to turn into a popsicle for no particular measurable good. I mean, clearly, I think that this is far from settled. You guys have seen this process as many times or more than I have. Iowa is not a state where everybody makes their decision a month out. Some of them make it the day before, the day of, a week before, and that's evident. It was in 2008, it was in 2012. I don't think the Iowa voters are settled, and a lot of them are just now finding out things about candidates. They may have liked somebody and the poll numbers look good, but the more they find out in this kind of very concentrated environment that they didn't know, and I believe it's one of the advantages that a guy like me has. I have been vetted. It's not like people say, don't know anything about this guy, never heard of him. I mean, everything that has ever been thought of negatively about me was said 8 years ago, and if it wasn't, it was said in all my many years in Arkansas, because that was a pretty tough environment. So I don't think there's going to be some big shocking surprise. You know, I was born in Hope, Arkansas. We have clearly established that a president can be born in Hope, Arkansas and be elected without controversy. So that's settled. That's off the table.
Well, it's true that obviously a large faction of people know you, but I read an article that said the top Googled term on you was, "Is he a Republican?" So obviously there's people who don't know a lot about you.
Yeah, isn't that weird? Yeah. If they knew better, they would vote for me, right?
Let's switch subjects.
Yeah.
You praised Iran's decision to release the Americans that were held as prisoner, but you criticized the Obama administration's negotiating strategy. How would you have handled that?
We would have never sat down at the table with the Iranians with those people still in Tehran. They would have been on an airplane on their way to the United States, or there wouldn't have been a discussion, and we would have tightened the screws on sanctions. The Iranians are getting away with the most amazing lopsided deal. We released 7 criminals for 4 hostages, maybe 5. I mean, I can't get my arms around that absolute lack of skill on the part of this administration to negotiate a deal. And think about this, we've given the Iranians between $100 and $150 billion in unfrozen assets. In our economy, if that kind of money proportionally were released to the U.S., it'd have the impact of $4 trillion. We have given them a stunning level of resources. And we are so silly and stupid to think that, oh no, they're not going to build any nuclear device with that. They're going to just go out there and build an electrical plant. Yeah, right. Because in 37 years of the Ayatollahs, they've never kept a deal, ever. Never.
What's the alternative to the nuclear deal then, to this agreement?
Well, I think that the alternative was to tell them they're not going to have nuclear capacity, continue the sanctions, try to encourage the people of Iran to rise up and take them out, and if they continue to work toward a nuclear device, then join with the other nations of the world and militarily, if necessary, militarily, in their capacity to do it.
So,
And no, go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
No, that's
So there's been, there's a lot of nervousness around the Middle East, around ISIS, around Iran among voters. There's also been a lot of discussion around regime change and how you handle regime change and some of the vacuums that those regimes have created to allow ISIS to gain power. Explain to us what your foreign policy towards not just Iran but other players in the Middle East would be as president.
I don't think it's the role of the United States to pick who gets to lead or to be the dictator of various countries. When we have gotten into that, we often have made huge mistakes, because if we assist in, directly affect, or even encourage the removal of one dictator, the vacuum created often results in a worse dictator or a worse level of leadership coming into the vacuum. We saw it in Libya, Egypt. We've seen it, hadn't quite a regime change in Syria, but the effort to get rid of Assad has not exactly been stellar. The civil war and the disaster that's unfolding has only given room for ISIS. It hasn't worked for us. And I think the United States has to be somewhat agnostic when it comes to who leads a country. Our concerns and interest ought to be, does this affect America, our Americans, and their security and safety? If it doesn't, we just can't involve ourselves in trying. I mean, we have enough trouble electing our own president, much less trying to pick the leaders for everybody else as well.
I think we're about out of time. Is there any last thing that you would like to say or want us to think about?
Only that I think if the Register really wants to have a stellar year in 2016, endorsing me would probably be a brilliant move. I'm pretty sure it's where you're headed, and so I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. You never know what an editorial board is going to think, but I do think, without any question, that I bring to this race a true understanding of what it means to be the chief executive of a government. And I've often said in my speeches that you elect a president not for what he knows is going to happen, because he can set his agenda and create a schedule and a whole plan that he's going to try to carry out. You ultimately elect the president for what nobody knows is going to happen. It's for the 9/11 and the Hurricane Katrina. It's for the unexpected. And you want to know, does this person have the skill set to be a leader in the midst of a crisis? Can he manage the unexpected, the unthinkable, the unimaginable? And I just continually say, I don't think this is a time to put somebody in the Oval Office and hope he's going to work out. I don't think the presidency is an entry-level job. I don't believe that the skills of a person who is good in the legislature necessarily translate into skills that are good in the executive branch, and frankly, vice versa. I came to the conclusion after several years of being governor, I don't want to go to the Senate. I don't want to go to Congress. I'd be miserable there. I'm not as much a process person as I am a product person. I understand what my skills are, what my strengths and my attributes are. And, working with the legislature, you tend to see what their priorities tend to be. And it's a very important role, but it's very different, totally different than it is to be the chief executive. And, I just feel like that's a skill set that America needs. And I believe ready and prepared for that task.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank
for your
you.
time.
I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for giving me this much of your time. And
We're going to take a photo of